Good morning, and thank you for joining to this morning's web seminar featuring Dr. Brian Street. Your moderators for this morning are Dr. Peggy Albers and Dr. Dennis Odo, professors of language and literacy at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and me, Tuba Angay Crowder, language and literacy doctoral student at Georgia State University. We are joined by our other GCLR research team members, Christy Pace, Aram Cho, Ji-Hei Shin, Sarah Turnbull, Jin Jiang, Mandy Sena, and Mi-Yang Pang, all doctoral students at Georgia State University. Global Conversations in Literacy Research consist of online interactive web seminars with the intent to circulate cutting-edge research in the fields of literacy and language arts. GCLR, as a research project, seeks volunteers for our study of critical literacy professional development in online spaces. If you are willing to participate in a brief interview, please type your email address into the chat area, and a research team member will contact you within a few days to schedule an appointment. We also invite you to take our survey. The link is located on the GCLR website. The data collected will provide important information for our understanding our research regarding web seminars and their impact on international literacy discussions. During this morning's web seminar, if you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat box. Dr. Odo will monitor that area, and Dr. Street will address these questions at the end of his presentation. Please help us honor our scholars' work by not replicating any of the slides. We would love to know from where you are participating in this morning's web seminar. So please use the star tool located to the immediate left of the slide and click your location on the map. If you're having trouble locating the star tool, a picture of it is located at the bottom of this slide. So yeah, we have different contents. And yeah, welcome. It's exciting to see everybody from different places. We are also interested in how many GCLR web seminars you have attended. Please use the poll button as demonstrated in the screenshot on this slide to indicate your participation. I think everybody participated. Thank you. This morning's web seminar features Dr. Brian Street and addresses the Letter Project, a training program that brings together ethnographic approaches to researching local literacies and educational approaches to learning and curriculum development in international spaces. The main focus of the Letter Project is to explore everyday literacy and numeracy in local communities using ethnographic style methodologies to help literacy facilitators, teachers, learn about the existing community literacy and numeracy activities of each particular learning group, and to help the learners themselves to become more aware of what they do and feel about literacy and numeracy. Dr. Brian Street is Professor Emeritus of Language in Education at King's College, London, England, and he is the Visiting Professor of Education in the Graduate School of Education, University of Pennsylvania, USA. He has a long-standing commitment to linking ethnographic style research on the cultural dimensions of language and literacy with contemporary practice in education and in development. In 2008, he received the Distinguished Scholar Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Reading Conference, USA. Dr. Street's publications include more than 20 books, many written collaboratively, and over 100 articles. His featured publication for today is Everyday Literacies in Africa, Ethnographic Studies of Literacy and Numeracy Practices in Ethiopia. At this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Streets and his presentation entitled The Letter Project, Learning for Empowerment Through Training in Ethnographic Research.
Sorry, there we go. You're on, Brian.
Good, thank you very much for this opportunity. There's lots of international experience coming in here, so I look forward to hearing what people have to say from different countries. Shall I start going through the PowerPoint?
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Brian.
Okay, so where's it gone? Right.
The little arrow is right above where it's the recording button.
Just got there. Okay, let me start with the story of the turtle and the fish, and then I'll come on to the academic and research points in a moment. So there's a Buddhist website that has the story of the turtle and the fish, and their aim is to illustrate the era of ethnocentrism. There was once a turtle who lived in a lake with a group of fish. One day the turtle went for a walk on dry land. He was away from the lake for a few weeks, and when he returned he met some of the fish, and they asked him, "Mr. Turtle, hello, how are you? We haven't seen you for a few weeks, where have you been?" And the turtle said, "I was up on dry land. I've been spending some time on dry land. I presented some of this material in Brazil a little while back, and one of the people in the audience went up to the blackboard and wrote, and you can see in Portuguese, Brazilian, terra, dry land, terra seca. And where have you been?" says the turtle up there. And the fish were puzzled. "What's dry land?" They said, "What are you talking about? What is this thing? Is it wet?" "No." "Is it cool and refreshing?" "No, it's not." Does it have waves and ripples? No, it doesn't have waves and ripples. Can you swim in it? No. So said the fish, hang on, it's not wet, it's not cool, there are no waves, and you can't swim in it. This dry land of yours must be completely non-existent, just an imaginary thing, it's not real at all. And the turtle said, what? Maybe. And he left the fish and went for another walk on dry land. In another version, he said, don't tell us what it isn't. The fish said, don't tell us what it isn't, tell us what it is. I can't, said the turtle, I don't have a language to describe it. So if we think about that in terms of our attempt to understand literacy or literacies in the plural global world, so off we go out into the different spaces where people engage with literacy, and we come back and the fish say, you know, is it phonics? Do they do it in this way and write on that page? No, it doesn't seem to be like that. Well, must be a myth image. So there's a deep theoretical debate underlying that issue, which I refer to as literacy as social practice. The dominant model probably in the school's context thinks of literacy as a skill to be learned, decoding, phonographic stuff. The moment we think of it as a social practice, we can begin to recognize variation. So for instance, in field work I did in Iran, I identified a range of local literacies. There were traders buying and selling fruits using bits of paper and checks. There was a religious school, Quranic school, and the Shah had started a state school. But apart from the state school, most of it wouldn't have been recognized in any tests or evaluations that had been done as literacy at all. In fact, people themselves often didn't assume what they were doing was literacy. So I've made a distinction here. We start with a theoretical level and we'll move into the practice, between what I term autonomous and ideological models. An autonomous model of literacy is a model, is an assumption, a set of conceptual ideas that help frame how we understand things, the sort of anthropological use of model. So an autonomous model is a set of assumptions that literacy is autonomous of social context. It's a set of skills which operate across those contexts. You teach them to people. Then they go out into the environment, into the social and cultural world. But the literacy is separate from those. It comes first. And I contrasted that with what I term an ideological model, not just a cultural model, which obviously follows as a critique of the autonomous model, but an ideological model, because not only are the different conceptions of literacy culturally based, they're also based in power relations. In fact, the autonomous model is one of the most powerful ideological models because it claims its view of literacy is the only one, and anything else is illiterate. That is highly ideological. I can come back to these things later. In trying to look on the ground, well, what's going on in an ethnographic way, I came to a distinction between events and practices. So you could look at an event, somebody is recording the number of apples that they're selling to the trader, but we don't yet know, and we don't speak the language, we haven't listened in, what's going on. What's it part of? So the concept of practices brings to the event a wider conceptual frame that says the meanings of the event are located in ideas, concepts, culturally constructed institutional ways of being and acting, which are practices. And I'll use that distinction a few times as we go along. One of the things that's happened in recent years has been a whole lot of studies about other communicative practices. In fact, I have a couple of books on my desk here, one called Communicative Practices at Work, Multimodality and Learning in a High-Tech Firm, that recognize that a lot of meaning takes place across modes, where mode might be not just written, but spoken, visual, kinesthetic, movement, gesture, all those kinds of things. So one of the key issues for learning and teaching is to see how far the participants are getting meaning regarding the literacy events they're involved in from a range of modes associated with the event. And in the academic world, the obvious one is, like you can see on the PowerPoint, we use bold print, we have dots, we have layout, headings. There's a whole way of presenting the writing, which is more than just the decoding of the letters. And finally, again, I'll refer in the data to this issue. What emerged, we talked about it in the course I used to do at the University of Pennsylvania, hidden and invisible literacies, and what students often find, and this was postgraduate students, but right through schooling and university, is that their teachers take for granted what the literacies they have to deal with, and the criteria they use for assessing them are often hidden, invisible. So right the way through the system, even at postgraduate level, you write an essay and the tutor says, well, this won't do. And you think, well, come on, I've got a degree, I've done a master's, I'm writing here. What's the problem? And the hidden literacies are very often features that become so taken for granted, in this case in the educational institution, that they haven't been made explicit and visible. The genres, the styles, the disciplinary assumptions about how you present knowledge are so often taken for granted that students struggle to find the ways of writing being required in that context. And that's one of the key issues when we look at the application of some of these theoretical research ideas to practice. And I can come back to each of these later if you like. So what I have been doing is bringing to this research an ethnographic perspective. And again, there are lots of assumptions and hidden assumptions about what's involved. For a lot of people, ethnography means a method, a technique. But I want to signal that it also means an underlying set of principles, an epistemological issue. And if you think of the story of the turtle and the fish, that's a key starting point for adopting ethnographic perspective. Well, we didn't know, we couldn't see, we weren't sure what this thing called dry land was. We could take our view of the sea with us, or we could suspend our view of waves and water and say, what are they doing up there? What does it mean to them? One of the principles here is referred to sometimes as emic, which means the participant's own view. And how does that relate to the view you brought in as the outsider, the etic? So the emic-etic is a constant dialogue. Reflexivity has become a key issue in doing ethnography, which means the importance for the ethnographer of recognizing where they have come from and how that might be affecting their account. You never overcome this into some perfect science moment, It's always an interaction. The views you bring, the etic, then bounce off the emic views of the locals, and you come up with an account that readers can then look at and make their own minds up. So reflexivity is a continuous process. And suddenly it's dialogic. You're not sitting there like a scientist, simply photographing other people's activity. You're in dialogue with them. And then the word practices, I've already mentioned a couple of times, I think is a useful conceptual issue that means more than just what you can see. It refers to the underlying concept of epistemological frames that make sense, that help you to make sense of what you're doing. The methods usually in ethnography involve observation, maybe taking photographs, asking questions, using field notes. But the primary thing is the underlying principles. So I was asked to apply some of these ideas to a project that was going on in India, and it's already been briefly mentioned. There's a NGO, a non-government organization called Nirantar, based in Delhi but working in the countryside, that was working to help women in particular in poorer areas to develop literacy. And the people running the project were training literacy teachers to help go out into the country and teach women. But what they began to find is that some of these teachers that they were trained began to adopt what I might call an autonomous model, a kind of dominant ideological view that somehow these women they were teaching were backward, illiterate, stupid. I went to some of the classes, and there was very much that sense that the students were seen, if they didn't have literacy, they must be backward and stupid. So they asked me to come in with this ethnographic perspective, and I went down, we'll see in a minute, some photographs of Mehroni, which is sort of south of Delhi, in the middle of India, to see what was going on, to talk with the various participants, and begin to build up a methodological and theoretical frame for how one might help to train trainers, that's one way we put it. So we train the people who then train the teachers, who then teach the students. And we use ethnographic perspectives with the understanding of literacies and of numeracies I'm giving. And so all the way through, this involves some combination of theory and of practice, and we'll see in a moment. So in the project, there are the learners in context, so for instance, rural women in Mehroni, then the people who teach them, then the trainers who teach those teachers, then the tutors who train the trainers, and I was involved in that, and then there's a whole lot of research and publications, so lots of levels going on in this project. And we gradually developed this approach, which said, okay, let's start in training the trainers, get say 20, 25 trainers together for a week. And we'll deal with some of the issues involved in ethnographic approaches to literacy and to numeracy of the kind I've been describing. Then the participants went away to their own countries. In the case of this workshop, people had come from India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And when they were back in their own country, they would follow through some of the implications of an ethnographic perspective. Then they'd come to the second workshop and report to each other on how that view had affected how they worked with local people in literacy and numeracy. Then after those discussions, they go away again and begin to think of how they could develop guidelines for creating curriculum for literacy teaching. And in the third workshop, a lot of time is spent looking at that, not a narrow, top-down curriculum, but socially sensitive approaches to how one might help learners to engage in some data, some interaction, some approaches to how we learn literacy and numeracy. And this is mainly, has been done with adult learners and trainers of adults. So following the India project, and the program was begun in Ethiopia with 3 workshops, and that's the one that we have the book Everyday Literacies in Africa for, with Alema Gebri and George Openjuru from Uganda, and then we went to Uganda where he was based and did one there, and we're now planning in these other countries to do these programs. So now let's look at what it looked like on the ground. So here we are in Meheroni. We were in the workshop and we came out, and one of the women walked up to a wall and started showing us some writing. She wasn't doing the writing herself, she was showing us some Hindi writing. And there may be, I'm sure there'll be people there on this global communication who could read that. And that translation is Happy Diwali, like in England we might say Happy Christmas. And there's this woman pointing to that. Each of these pictures raises an issue, so you might want to think as you look at each one, what's the issue here? So I would say the issue in this one is the issue of the surface on which we write. The dominant model tends to require that writing is done in certain kinds of textbook, on certain kinds of paper. You sit in lots of classrooms and there's nothing on the walls, nothing else around. And yet in much of the world, people write on the surfaces around them just like this. So we'll keep an eye out for that as we go through. So here we are inside the workshop, and there were trainers being brought from England and places. But the first issue was, okay, well, you know the local language and script, and I don't. So let's not start with me teaching them, let's start with you teaching me. So teach me how to write my name, Brian. So they're the Hindi characters for Brian. I say I come from a town in England called Brighton. Brian and Brighton sound a bit similar. How's the orthography work? So they then teach me how to write Brighton. So I can now write 2 words and about 5 different signs, script items. So they are showing me, and that's a key issue in this approach to learning and teaching. It works both ways. We mentioned a few times that it's not just about literacy, it's also about numeracy. And numeracy is even more, I think, stuck in a dominant model, the autonomous model that says these people are innumerate, backward, stupid. So let's, ethnographic perspective, let's just hang on. What are they doing? Well, they're growing crops. They then sell crops to other people. How do they do that? Here we have an example. They get a container, they put some of the crop in, and they may sell that much of the crop for a certain price. So there's quite a bit of numeracy going on. It may not look like the formal features of numeracy in a Western school, but actually just like the literacy practices locally, the numeracy practices are a key part of local life. And here we have, I took a photograph of a calendar in someone's house. Here we have lots of numbers. We have Hindi script and Roman script. We have writing. We have a whole mix of features, these things going on in people's houses. And then we moved to Ethiopia. And here we are. We walked around the town with people after the ethnography workshop and said, okay, let's just observe what's going on. The dominant assumption is they're all illiterate and we're here to give them literacy. But wait a minute. What's this sign? What are the scripts? And those of you who know this part of the world, Amharic is one of the world's oldest scripts. Then there's some writing in Arabic, and there's also writing in Roman, Salam. So we have 3 scripts, and immediately the question will start arising. What do we use different scripts for? Well, here's some Amharic, and the local person writing on the wall of their house. I became lonely in order to make my life easier, because today's friend is tomorrow's enemy. So there we have a genre, shall we call it, which is writing words of wisdom on the wall of a house. In this case, also using Amharic script. I went with a group of people who visited a mosque, and there on the left there's writing in Arabic, but there on the wall was a notice handwritten in Amharic: turn off mobile phones before entering. So here's another principle. Some writing is done on the computer or typewriter, and some is done in handwriting. Some is done in one language, Arabic, some is done in another language, Amharic. And here's a notice for 3 scripts and languages. And this is one of the main uses of those languages and scripts for religious texts. Now quickly in Uganda, again, let's look around with the group. Let's photograph notice boards. These are notice boards telling you the names of places. Here's another name, it's called E-Club. So just round the corner is a little workshop where you can take your computer or go and do electronic internet connections. And here's a house with no signs. Now wait a minute though. Up there on the top left is a notice. It was actually put there by the people who built the gate. And it advertises their product. If you want a gate that will keep burglars out, get in touch with us and we'll provide you with one. So actually there are notices and signs around, and people are reading them. Here there aren't any. And now we get to Brighton, where I live, and here we are on the beach. A boat sank. It was carrying logs. So what do people on the beach do with all these planks of wood? They might build a little teepee here, or they might start writing. Happy birthday, it says, using the planks on the beach. But the council got worried in Brighton and said, oh dear, people are going to be picking up these planks. They'll get little splinters of wood in their finger, they'll sue us. We'd better clear the beach. So up come the bulldozers and clear the beach. So one other principle again, as we look at each of these pictures, literacy is often treated as though it's a fixed, permanent resource, where speaking is ephemeral. But actually, in a case like this, literacy can also be ephemeral. And in lots of cases, notices on walls and things, the writing can be cleared away very quickly. And meanwhile, of course, as we know, spoken language can be recorded. So that distinction between spoken and written doesn't work so well anymore. And here, what we've seen around the world are examples of organizations writing on beaches. This isn't going to be permanent either, but it does its job. And here, just outside Brighton, on the Downs, someone apparently organised the sheep to make a word, spring. So what are the principles that come out of this kind of approach? Well, the first is, and people found this when they came back from the workshops back into the class, we could no longer say, how do we take literacy to the illiterate? Instead, we have to ask a much more sophisticated question. Which languages are people using, and which scripts are they doing those languages in, for which purposes? Which is a much more complex question and much closer to local practices. Then I've already signaled we could look at what are the surfaces on which people write. Again, the dominant model of literacy tends to have a rather narrow view, exercise books and school textbooks. But actually out there in the world there are surfaces, as we've seen, beaches and walls, lots of different materials, lots of resources, and colours and fonts are used as part of that meaning. They can be ephemeral or permanent, and very often they're not allowed in classrooms. You can't go and write on the wall in lots of places, but sometimes they're transgressed as well. Part of the dominant model is attention to orthography. How do the signs represent sounds? There's punctuation, spelling, all kinds of scripts. Once you start going into that and looking at the local practices, that's much more complex than a simple single set of rules. I've mentioned modality, different modes, written mode, visual, spoken, gesture. And I've introduced here the concept of genre. So different ways of presenting, communicating knowledge and information. Maybe using notices, books, messages, instructions, signs, no notices. And we need to understand then not only the orthographic principles, but the genres that people are communicating in. So why do we need to know all this? Back to the turtle and the fish. Because actually we need to listen to others. And that's sometimes difficult as teachers because the assumption is they don't know and we do. But in these adult literacy situations, that just isn't true. They know quite a lot. And one of the books on the list is called Hidden Literacies, which Rafat Nabi's written in Pakistan. And she found the same. People would say, we are not literate. And when she looked more closely, they were writing lists of the food, the shopping. Yeah, but this doesn't count as literacy, they would say. Well, no. So if you listen and take account of the emic perspective, you may find a lot more literacy going on using ethnographic principles than a dominant school model might do. So I conclude with some of the language for describing this. We can impose an outside view, or we can work with a local view. The metaphors for the outside view are, for instance, Paolo Freire talked about this, fill empty vessels as though the people we're teaching, the so-called illiterates, were empty vessels and we had to pour the literacy in. Or another model, another metaphor that uses banking. Here, these empty spaces, we will fill them. The alternative metaphors are we build on what people already know. We bridge between what they know and what we know, and moving backwards and forwards. The metaphor scaffolding can be quite helpful in the building world. So you're doing things on the building, you put some pipes and stairs outside the building, and you move around on these as you help move in and out. You bridge the local situation, the building, and what you're bringing from outside. And you bring out the hidden and invisible literacies that people are engaged with. That involves quite a different pedagogic and theoretical framework than a dominant model that assumes that all you're doing is filling empty vessels. So that, I think, is a way of bringing together the theory and the research I've been talking about with the actual practice of teaching. So now I look forward to your opportunity to chat and ask questions and discuss further. Thank you. And there's some of the references.
Thank you, Dr. Street, for your insightful and engaging presentation. We now invite Dr. Street to respond to the questions that participants have generated across the presentation. Please continue typing your questions in the question and answer session facilitated by Dr. Odo.
Thanks very much, Thibault. So I did collect quite a few interesting questions were generated through the course of the presentation, and I'll go ahead and share them with you now, Dr. Street, and you can sort of share your thoughts on these questions. The first one comes from Cindy Fujimoto, and she asks, she says, I think that it is what is challenging with literacy, the invisible or hidden literacies. She asks, or she comments rather, educators tend to view it from the dominant definition, what is visible, for example, letters, words, text, and numbers. How do we expand this definition of literacy, and how do we get society to value it? She asks.
Yes. Well, one area to work with is teachers. Well, okay, let's start with the society. One of the things Rafat Nabi found, that blue book on the right-hand side on the picture there, Hidden Literacies. So she lived in Karachi in Pakistan. She was running literacy programs. She talked with people who helped do the food and the cooking in her parents' house. And she noticed on the kitchen wall that they would write a list of the days of the week and the names of the people in the house. And then in the little boxes, she would put it in the book. They would put the names of the food for each person on each day. And Rafat would say to them, wow, you're really into literacy. And there is, oh no, ma'am, we are not literate like you. Because the word literacy appeared to be reserved for high-level schooled activity. So one of the first moves was, in relation to your question, to help local people to recognize the value of what they're already doing. So Rafat started talking to people, the barra boy, the people who worked in the kitchen, people in shops, about their literacy practices, and help them to see they were actually already engaged in quite sophisticated uses of reading and writing, and of course multimodality. So now we transfer that into the classroom. So people arrive and they say, well, we've come here to learn literacy, and we are ignorant and illiterate. We say, okay, let's start by finding out what you already know. We don't know any. Well, oh, you do this writing. Oh, you write checks. Oh, you keep records. Oh. So let's share this information. And on the basis of that, you can build quite a lot of meta knowledge about literacy. And that's one of the things teaching does. It doesn't just teach, this is how you do it. It teaches an extra layer of knowledge. Well, what is it that you're doing? And certainly one of the key issues here would be the recognition that writing is always embedded in other modes. So that picture we have up on the front at the moment has a variety of complex modal features. It has color for the thank you and for my name, inverted commas, layout, pictures on the left, pictures of books on the right. You start looking at that. How do we make sense of that text? And the answer has to be by a combination of modes, of which orthographic deconstruction is only one element. And that's one of the dangers if the dominant model only does narrow phonic or deconstruction. People won't actually be able to handle the complexity of these kinds of multimodal texts. So that's the link, I think, between the theory and the practice.
Great, thank you. I have a second question here that might kind of relate to some of the themes, but I think it's an interesting question. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it. This comes from Lena Trigos, and she says, Dr. Street, what do you think about the international tests such as PISA, which try to assess through an autonomous model the literacy, quote-unquote, skills of children in developing countries in order to suggest certain policies?
I've just written a paper on this. This year there were 3 different international reports on how to measure literacy. One was PISA, and that's for children, people under 15. One was PIAC, P-I-A-A-C, which was doing the same thing for adults. And one was the GMR, the Global Monitoring Report, which UNESCO does, which attempted to do international comparisons. And there's a huge vested interest if a country can demonstrate that it has moved up the layers in these tests, then they can persuade commercial investors to put more money into the country, because the investors will get returns because there'll be more literate people around, supposedly. So it's a very big ideological and political game. So you can't just go and say to them, abandon this and go for more local complexity, because there are too many vested interests. And they do have an argument as well, which we have to listen to. So when we talk in this country, in England, where I'm living, with the acronym DFID, Department for International Development. And they are sort of aware of some of these issues we're raising, but they say, look, the problem is, if we were to follow this route that you're going down in this ethnographic perspectives, where would it stop? Every little village and town has got its own way of doing things. Our job is to help the central state to up its figures, to have more literacy, and to be geared to the commercial developments that are needed. So there needs to be a dialogue. So I don't want to just present this as a let's slag off PISA, PIAC, GMR, DFID, and all the rest of them. Let's talk with each other and work out programs, and that's what the letter program's been doing. The Ethiopia program was funded by Southeast Asia funding body with lots of different countries and United Nations. Similarly, Uganda and the one in India. But in each case, the NGOs are trying also to keep relatively independent, because they get sucked in too strongly to the Department of Education or the Department of Development. They could finish up in this narrow measurement scheme and miss the ethnography. If they go too far in the ethnographic direction, then the political groups will say, we can't cope with this, we need some kind of patterns, some centralization. So it's an ongoing argument rather than a final position on either side. That would be the short story, but I could let you have the paper I've just done that tries to bring some of this together on PIAC, PISA, GMR.
Yeah, that's great. That would be, I think, a really helpful resource. Thanks. So my next question comes from, my next question is from Kathy Godfrey. And Kathy asks, I wonder how the teachers responded to the attempt to get them to move beyond autonomous approaches to literacy. What were the tensions, and how were those tensions resolved or addressed?
Yes, very good question. And the answer, of course, is it's not fixed and final. There are lots of different things going on. So in Ethiopia, we were down in the south, in a little town, and we have people from all over the country, a lot of whom were expecting to be told how to do decoding of letters. So on the first day, we talked a bit about ethnographic perspectives. And then we said, right, let's on the second day go out in small groups, 4 to 5. Let's try to get a language and literacy mix in each group so that you can recognize what you see out there. And we spent the next day out on the streets. And you've seen some of the photographs that came from that. So then they look at those pictures, and when we came back in, each of the teams would have a meeting together to discuss what they had seen. That would be a good example. So what's going on here? Which script is being used for which purpose? And one group found that the Arabic script was being used not only for religious purposes, but also in some shops that were selling goods that had been delivered from Arabic countries. So they reported on that. Another group reported on the church. Another group reported on the mosque. Another group reported we saw the hairdresser. And getting people to do these reports to each other opened up that issue. It was much harder for anyone to say, but all I want to do is know how to unpack salam. Write it down. Yeah, but which language is being used? And which script is being used? And which purposes is being used for? And how does that fit with the social pattern in the area? So the questions that emerged were so much more complex that most of the people in the audience, in the class, not necessarily all, but most, by the end, were beginning to ask these questions and then say, right, we want to go off now in the gap between the workshops for a few months. Let's go out to our own neighborhood. So in the India project, some people went to Nepal and started working with agricultural laborers who had got advertisements and labels on packets of seeds for sowing food they could grow. So they began to note the literacy involved and its link with social practices. So it wasn't a matter of us sitting there lecturing and saying, right, now you will come round to our view and abandon the other view. But look, here's a perspective, now go out and try it out yourself. And people went off all around the country and around the world, trying it out for themselves and then reporting back to each other. One of the big themes here is collaborative interaction, people talking to each other, not just the teachers lecturing from above, but the participants saying, well, when I was in this village, this is what I saw and happened. What has that link with what you saw? And then what are the implications of that for how we teach literacy to the people who come forward for literacy classes. So that's the approach. And yes, we could describe a variety of different views and perspectives amongst the participants. In Ethiopia, we did have a session which the minister came along to and said, oh, I'll see if I can build this into my programs. And that's one way of talking to ministers rather than just sitting around a desk with them, get them to come along and watch what's happening and listen to the local people talk. So it's an ongoing process. It doesn't finish. It's always moving. But that would be the process that I would favour, and rather than the dominant model. Yeah.
Great. I have time, I think, for one more question. And this question kind of touches on some themes you've already raised, but I think it's worthwhile circling back to. This one comes from Jessica Tapia. And Jessica asks, if students are interested in achieving academic literacy, shouldn't instructors support that? I understand that they have some sort of literacy and that we should support that literacy and use it to support literacy, but isn't it also important to value academic literacy? Any thoughts or comments you'd like to share on that, Dr. Street?
Yes, one of my colleagues at King's College, Ursula Wingate, has been looking at what we've been doing and seeing how it relates to what she's been doing in supporting students writing in the university. And she says, well, it's not enough to assume that we will help these students with transformation, is the word that some people have used. She says in their first year, students in the university, they've done schoolwork, they've passed exams, they know some academic writing. They now want to know how to do the academic writing required at the university. And she says, I'll help them to do it. So she wrote an article, which I can also send you, called The Best of Both Worlds, in which she says, yes, these ideas about literacy as social practice are important, we should take account of them, and there's some transformation involved, but we do also have to build on what people already know, help their confidence when they come in, so that they already have some academic writing skill. Let's recognize that, demonstrate to them what it is they've got, make it visible, and then say, look, you are now doing a degree in physics. Your tutor may require more than what you've done at A level at your school. So we will help you to develop the new academic literacy practices that the institution requires. So her phrase, the best of both worlds, I think answers your question about how we combine this research I've been talking about with being realistic in the practice. Do you want to come back on that? Or?
Dennis may have a little bit of trouble with his internet. He's been having a little bit of intermittent disruption. So I'm just going to step in. This is Peggy. And that is going to conclude our questions because we're nearly at the end of our hour. So Tuba, will you go ahead and finish up with the presentation?
Thank you, Dr. Albers. Thank you again, Dr. Street, for your insights on this morning's literacy conversation. You have given us much to consider in the realm of literacy education.
Thank you. It's been very interesting to talk to people. And I'll send you some of these references I've been referring to.
Thank you. We would appreciate you taking a moment to type into the chat area one thought about this web seminar. Please help support the GCLR research project by taking the GCLR survey. The link is located on the homepage of the GCLR website. Your participation enables us to understand online spaces for critical talk and discussion about literacy issues. We are also in need of volunteers to participate in a 15 or 20-minute interview as part of the GCLR research study. If you are willing to participate, please type your name and email address into the chat area, and someone from the research team will contact you within a week to schedule an interview.
Okay. Right, so I'll do that. I'll write something into the chat and I'll use my email address, my Gmail. I'll give it to you in just a moment. Rather than my King's one, which gets a bit cluttered.
Thank you, Dr. Street. Tonight's this morning's web seminar marks the last in the 2013 and 2014 series. We want to thank all of our 2013 and 2014 speakers, and we appreciate that so many of you supported this project this year. We are now planning for our 2014 and 2015 series. We have 4 confirmed speakers: Dr. Ken Hyland, University of Hong Kong in October 2014. Dr. David Berliner from Arizona State University. He's presenting on November 9, 2014. And Dr. Barbara Comber in January 2015. And Dr. Jackie Marsh on February 8, 2015. Please check our websites for updated information on our next year's series of speakers. And please share our project with others whom you think would be interested. Access to our archives of past GCLR web seminars is available at our YouTube channel, or you can have an access to our archives on the website, on our website. It's http://globalconversationsinliteracy.wordpress.com. And on the behalf of the entire GCLR research team and me, Tuba Angar-Crowder, thank you for all sharing this hour with Dr. Brian Street. GCLR truly appreciates your attendance, participation, and most importantly, your interest in these most important discussions about literacy. For those of you wishing to continue the conversation generated by Dr. Street's talk, please join the Twitter room, #GCLR_GSU, following this presentation. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Teachers learn about the existing community literacy and numeracy activities of each particular learning group, and to help the learners themselves to become more aware of what they do and feel about literacy and numeracy. Dr. Brian Street is Professor Emeritus of Language in Education at King's College, London, England, and he is the Visiting Professor of Education in the Graduate School of Education, University of Pennsylvania, USA. He has a long-standing commitment to linking ethnographic style research on the cultural dimensions of language and literacy with contemporary practice in education and in development. In 2008, he received the Distinguished Scholar Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Reading Conference, USA. Dr. Street's publications include more than 20 books, many written collaboratively, and over 100 articles. His featured publication for today is in online spaces. If you are willing to participate, In a brief interview, please type your email address into the chat area, and a research team member will contact you within a few days to schedule an appointment. We also invite you to take our survey. The link is located on the GCLR website. The data collected will provide important information for our understanding our research regarding web seminars and their impact on international literacy discussions. During this morning's web seminar, if you have any comments or questions, please type them into the chat box. Dr. Odo will monitor that area, and Dr. Street will address these questions at the end of his presentation. Please help us honor our scholars' work by not replicating any of the slides. We would love to know from where you are participating in this morning's web seminar. So please use the star to I think everybody participated. Thank you. This morning's web seminar features Dr. Brian Street and addresses the Letter Project, a training program that brings together ethnographic approaches to researching local literacies and educational approaches to learning and curriculum development in international spaces. The main focus of the Letter Project is to explore everyday literacy and numeracy in local communities using ethnographic style methodologies to help literacy facilitators teach located to the immediate left of the slide and click your location on the map. If you're having trouble locating the star tool, a picture of it is located at the bottom of this slide. So yeah, we have different contents, and yeah, welcome. It's exciting to see everybody from different places. We are also interested in how many GCLR web seminars you have attended. Please use the poll button as demonstrated in the screenshot on this slide to indicate your participation. Good morning, and thank you for joining to this morning's web seminar featuring Dr. Brian Street. Your moderators for this morning are Dr. Peggy Albers and Dr. Dennis Odo, professors of language and literacy at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia, USA, and me, Tuba Angay Crowder, language and literacy doctoral student at Georgia State University. We are joined by our other GCLR research team members, Christy Pace, Aram Cho, Ji-Hei Shin, Sarah Turnbull, Jin Jiang, Mandy Sena, and Mi Yang Pang. all doctoral students at Georgia State University. Global conversations in literacy research consist of online interactive web seminars with the intent to circulate cutting-edge research in the fields of literacy and language arts. GCLR, as a research project, seeks volunteers for our study of critical literacy professional development